charity, and our mission is to make Hart Island visible and accessible, and we provide services to families and friends of the people buried on Hart Island. We're not a political organization, we're allowed to lobby, so we're just here to answer questions that you might have about Hart Island. And I wanted to introduce to you our new website, which is called the Traveling Cloud Museum. In 2011, I received a grant from the New York State Council on the Arts to add interactive features to our database. And it took a while for us to figure out the right design for storytelling on Hart Island. We ended up writing our own software and patenting it, and trademarking the logo and everything. So this is our all new website, and some of you may have been there. Oh, well, we don't have any sound.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, I can.
What's the name of it again?
Traveling Cloud.
Thank you.
It's coming from your
Oh,
computer.
here. Let me stop and we'll get the sound because it's a really nice soundtrack. Okay. I just have to set it up.
Everything's okay with the setup?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Thank
We
you.
we didn't have enough time to do the sound check. So, I have to choose the sound sign. Good. That's good. So this is, basically here's how we decided to organize it. We have over 60,000, 62,000 people in the database. Once we enter the data for 2014, it'll be around 65,000 or so people in the database. Some people are not in the database because we received records where it was hard to read somebody's name. So there are people missing in the database. But basically the software pulls people to the front, and each person is listed as kind of a post-it, and when you roll over, it gives you how that person is recorded by New York City, by the Department of Correction on Hart Island, and then if you click on it, it goes to that person's profile, and it shows you their profile. This is all the data. Oh, I'm sorry. Give it back to me. It's too sensitive. This is all the data that is in the burial records, including the location, and it gives you a little map right there that shows you where that person is buried. And you can click on that and go into an interactive map. So this is all data that we got last year through Freedom of Information and also help from the New York Times pressuring the Department of Correction to give us this data. So, okay, so just in terms of looking at Hart Island, each one of these yellow little yellow markers is a mass grave, and it's a mass grave for which we have data, and that data is in the database. So it's, if you click on each one of these people, if you click on one of these, it'll take you into the database, and these are listed, all of the people who are in that grave, which is grave number 50, so that's an infant grave. So these are all babies, 1,000 of them, that were buried in 1984. Oh no, I'm sorry, this isn't babies given the age. These are adults buried in 1984. So that's basically how to use, I'm just going to go through how to use the Traveling Cloud Museum. So then when you go and you click on each one of these people, then it takes you again to that person's profile. And then each person has assigned to them a clock that measures the amount of time that that person has been buried. You can see the clock is ticking in seconds. The amount of time that that person has been buried in anonymity on Hart Island until somebody adds the story. So it just keeps ticking until somebody selects this add a story. Then you have to give a login. I'll just go in myself. You have to register. The only thing, there's no cost to registration or anything. You have to remember your password. Like me, that's always a problem. And then you can go in and take me back to that search. So if we go back to that search, take me back there. Yeah, okay, so then we go back to where we were, and you can pick one of these. You can pick someone once you've logged in, and you can add a story right then and there. And it's text. You can add text. You can add an epitaph, which is just a short, what an epitaph is. You can upload an image. You can add a video, which is a link to either YouTube or video, or you can add something from SoundCloud. So the software will take, information in whatever format you want to. You have to yourself upload it to YouTube or Vimeo before using it. So that's basically how all of these people are organized in our database. So again, you can go search, and let's just go back to that. Still on adding stories. You can search by last name. You can search by date of death. If you know the date of death, you can search by place of death. And say you want, this is the list. You can see there's quite a few institutional places for people to die in New York City, which is part of the reason people get lost in New York City. These are all just institutional places to die that are in our database, and the only reason they're there is somebody in the database died there. So as you can see, there are quite a few. The city hospitals obviously have many people there, so Bellevue is probably the place that lots of people come from. But so then who is buried on Hart Island? Basically anybody whose family doesn't show up within a week will be buried on Hart Island. If the family donates the body to medicine, and doesn't ask for the remains back, they can live on Hart Island. So it's not necessarily people that no one cared about. It can be someone who was generous enough to be an organ donor, and the family allowed for the city to transfer the body for use in research or whatever. So all of those people are there, and our effort is really to find a way to preserve the stories so while people still remember them. We do have records, adult records going back to 1977, but it's very unclear when those people were buried. And our database is all organized around date of burial, because that's the one thing the correction officers got right. is they knew what day it was when they actually performed this burial. So that was the one sort of accurate thing in the database, but in the older records, which were kept on Hart Island, it really is difficult to read everything on them, but there were many pages in which you didn't know exactly when this person was buried. So when you go through these, you can see there are gaps, and like this area right here. This is all burials from the earliest days of Potter's Field when Jacob Riis was photographing out there and up until the 70s. There was a fire on Hart Island in July 1977 which destroyed all the records going back to 1961 and many earlier records as well. So this area has thousands of people buried in it, but we don't know who's buried where because the records were kept on Hart Island and they were destroyed by vandals. So if you think Hart Island is secure, I can prove to you that it's not secure, that it's heavily vandalized and the graves are desecrated and it's, you know, basically the identities of all these people are erased. So in here these are all babies from the 90s, and then if you go down here, then this area over here is where babies after 2000 were buried. This area is all adults. And the way that you can figure it out is just basically going into the database and searching for someone, and or clicking on a plot and seeing if they're babies. And you can tell if they're an infant because their age is 0, or it's 2 hours or something like that, or they're stillborn. And you can tell it's an adult because it's over 18, and there are almost no children children are almost never buried on Hart Island because children the state has oversight over what happens to them. Right? So I just wanted to show you basically how it is. It's a tool if you know somebody. We're trying to get not second or third person accounts, but first person accounts. If you knew somebody and you have something you can add about that person, then you're invited to participate. So not taking stuff from Wikipedia and cutting and pasting it in. It should be something, hopefully first person stories. And there's no, it's not necessary for the stories to be, they're not going to check on their accuracy. You can write a poem for somebody and submit it. So it's really meant to be a way of collecting the history of 10% of the population that disappears in New York City. Okay, so that's the Traveling Cloud Museum. We are not, we don't have a blog or anything like that you can add to. We do post news stories that are published here, and we post events that are something we participate in. So we have those posted. So I'll take just if there are any questions or people, yeah.
You mentioned that the website, you're not checking for accuracy, or are the comments or anything else that's being submitted, are those, do they have to go through like a moderation process?
Yeah, I get an email and I look at it.
Okay.
On every single one, and so far there's been nobody, the stories have been really moving, and there's been nobody posting anything that's offensive or an ad or anything like that. People are taking their time and writing things carefully. Mostly it's children of somebody who died, who, you know, they lost a parent and they didn't know them for very long, or, you know, or a sibling. People, or twins, where one twin died, that kind of thing. So that's generally who's
The only
using it.
reason I asked is because you mentioned that the island itself has been vandalized in the past, and internet vandalism is unfortunately common also. So I was just glad that you are checking on that.
And we're on we moved all our database away from Windows and onto a very secure platform with a developer who does healthcare, only works for nonprofits and does healthcare. So it's actually quite a secure, and when you have to agree to the terms of use, and the terms of use is that we can delete anything you put up there. So that gives me the right to sort of decide. So this is what it looks like when somebody has added content, and this is actually the only person I've added content for. This was Leonard Malfi, who was an important playwright in New York City, and he died and his family was not properly notified, and they found out a few months later that his body had been transferred to trained funeral directors, so it was not exactly intact. He'd already been embalmed. And they sued New York City and won. And so his case is broadly known. And Leonard wrote a play called Sweet Sweet, in which he actually played the part of a character who dies and is buried on Hart Island, and then is reincarnated as the ultimate anonymous person in New York City, a hotel bellhop. Like room service. His character is named Room Service. And apparently, this is a note from the director of the play. Leonard didn't act in very many of his plays, but he actually played this part every night. So in some ways, yeah, I feel that it was, he cast himself in this role and he actually pulled it off in the end. But now he's reburied in his family cemetery in upstate Binghamton, by his brothers. So at any rate, I haven't posted very many. I'm leaving it for the families to add the stories, and for the public to, everybody knows somebody, a baby, someone who lost a baby, or someone who had an addiction and didn't do so well and became disconnected. Everybody in New York City knows those people. So it's really a community website, and it's a community project. And I'm happy to help anybody who wants to, needs help scanning photos or anything like that, or if somebody wants help writing. But there are lots and lots of people in the Traveling Cloud Museum that have interesting stories.
Melinda, you've done a fantastic job. And this never would have even happened at all if it hadn't been you right from the start. Thank you so much.
We have, I think, around 2,400 registered members of the Hart Island Project. So these are all people who have someone located on Hart Island that they were searching for, because there's no reason to register unless you're interested in adding stories. So that's where it is. Not all the stories are up, but people are busy collecting their thoughts and deciding what they want to more interested in. So.
I wanted to mention one thing in the Hart Island article that's in today's most current Bronx Times. It's a I think you'd see a pretty good article, but they make the comment that it's for paupers.
Right.
And of course that's wrong.
Well, that's the stigma, right? And
That's when it first started. That's when it was first. When it first buried, the people started with paupers, and then it became everybody that didn't have.
the biblical
plots.
reference is to the burial of strangers, and so, why are we all strangers, right? Because we don't form communities and keep track of one another, right? So that's, in a way, that is what Hart Island is. But there's, it's reversible. I've worked with many families who have performed disinterments, and it's really, really meaningful to the family to be able to reverse the whole process. City disinters for free, so all of that. But really the system is something where it takes, some time to switch this. And so I guess that brings us up to our other item on the agenda, which is to answer questions about the legislation, which would mean that you could take this application on your mobile device and actually navigate to a gravesite, because it's all hooked into Google Maps, right? So the maps are going to be updated, we're going to update all the information and whatnot, and when you do get access, you'll be able to go there without a correction officer and do what you need to do at a gravesite. So, Rosalie.
Yeah, can you at least mention the wonderful little on MSNBC documentary about my travail trying to see my mommy?
We could show that too at the end. Rosalie came, we had our annual meeting in this room last June, and not too many people attended, but Rosalie attended and one other family member, and we went over, we had Dave Dubinin, and we went over and he had written a song for Hart Island. People submit songs, and he performed it at the gate, and then Rosalie wanted to know how she could get to the gazebo. And so I explained to her that on the third Thursday of the month, you can go with the Department of Correction, and you have to be here at 8:30 in the morning. I explained all of that, but somehow I didn't explain that you had to make an appointment with the Department of Correction, which is the hard part. And so she showed up at that time and was not given access,
But had a documentary photographer with me,
But she
so
had-
it's completely, they got,
well, it was, well, what
I
happened
had my
was you
innards ripped out, but it was
You
documented.
talked about, the reason you had come to that meeting was because we were gonna do a sing-along and your mother had done karaoke. And so then, when an MSNBC reporter contacted me and I said, I think this karaoke Gladys would be a really good, apparently she's got a lot of fans in Manhattan and she might be a good character. So why don't you meet Rosalie at the dock and get her story and then go meet the people that she knew. And then there was this newsworthy event that happened as a result. I really didn't set it up or anything, it was just happened that way. But a lot of times people go to the dock and they think they can get on, and it's sort of, who would have thought that you need to call the prison system to make an appointment to go to a cemetery? So that's really, it's not a usual practice for a city to require that you register to visit a cemetery, let alone register with the prison system. So that's the thing that I think is most disturbing to people. So that, yeah, so anyways, there was a beautiful piece that was broadcast on January 11th, I think it was, on MSNBC nationally, and it's just a fabulous documentary. So we can watch that in closing maybe. We showed it at the Civic Council. Or not the Civic Council, the Community Board Parks Committee meeting. So, I handed out a copy of the bill, just so, this is not my bill, as many people think that I'm responsible for it, but in fact, the City Council doesn't take orders from me. Much as I wish they would follow all of my recommendations. Elizabeth Crowley introduced this, and this is the second time this bill has been introduced.
Is there more copies?
Yeah, well, there's one more.
What's the bill number? Control.
There were two, it's 133 and 134.
Yeah, I'm only handing out 134. 133 is just ferry service, so that. Oh, I don't have any.
That's it?
Yeah.
Well, maybe
this
could.
Oh, wait a minute, here's one more.
Yeah, I'll make it out, if you and I make it out.
I've got a few more mixed in here. Oh, yeah, I do have a few more.
Jerry will make some copies.
I can make a copy.
I'll go out to the library and make some copies. How many need?
As you can see, it doesn't
Nobody
take,
needs copies?
it
Okay, so I'll have-
doesn't take the Department of Correction off the code. The Department of Correction will still be managing the burials on Hart Island. It just means that the overall management of the island, the management of the landscape and visitation will be Department of Parks. And I know lots of people think Department of Parks is totally dysfunctional and whatnot, but I still think it's a much different deal to deal with the Department of Parks than to deal with the prison system. It's just a fundamentally different experience. And the tradition in New York City is for the first public park was Madison Square Park, which was a potter's field that closed in 3 years. It was opened from 1794 to 1797. 20% of the population died of yellow fever in that period of time, and it was filled. So in 3 years, and it was a much bigger area than what is now Madison Square Park. Then it became a parade ground, and then it was used as the House of Refuge. And the Common Council basically decided that in order for the Potter's Field not to be developed, that it would remain open as a public square forever. And that was the beginning of the park system in New York City. So all of the Potter's Fields, with the exception of one that was closed and the bodies were moved in order to put in the train lines going into Grand Central, what is now Park Avenue, all of them have become public parks. So whether or not you agree with Potter's Field becoming public parks, that is the tradition in New York City. And the burials are still there at Washington Square Park, at City Hall Park, at Bryant Park, at Randall's Island, and at Ward's Island, and those were huge Potter's Fields. So that is our history. Whether or not it should be something else, I don't know. But that there is precedent for the Parks Department handling these historic burial grounds. And their argument is that, well, yes, we've managed Potter's Fields after they're closed, but not while they're still active. And we don't have any active cemeteries. But in fact, Prospect Park has a Quaker cemetery in the middle of it, and the land was gifted to the Brooklyn Park system by the Quakers with the stipulation that they would continue their burials, which they do today. And I will say the Quaker burials cost the same as the Hart Island burials. They're very simple burials, they cost $1,000. That's what the city spends to bury somebody. So Prospect Park is a very active park with an active cemetery in the middle. It's a fenced area. It's open to the public certain times of the year when friends invite, and the Prospect Park Alliance does manage the landscape within the cemetery as well. So it's not true that the Parks Department can't manage the landscape of an active cemetery. They don't conduct the burials, but they're not going to conduct the burials on Hart Island either. So.
I have a question. You said it was $1,000 is the cost to bury one person.
That's what the Quaker, if you go onto their website, the Friends, it's about that. When I researched it, that's what it was. It depends on the funeral director, so they get individual funeral directors. But on Hart Island, yes, it costs the city. Burial assistance covers the cost of what the city pays for a burial on Hart Island. So anybody who dies within New York City, the family can go to apply for burial assistance in Brooklyn and get paid $900 for funeral expenses up to $1,700, I think it is. And that's enough to cover the cost of a cremation or a very simple burial. So that's basically what it costs. It costs the city, $900 to $1,000 to bury every single person on Hart Island. So it's not an inexpensive burial. There's a lot of paperwork. Additionally, there are all these wrongful burial lawsuits that the city pays out $1 million each time they don't properly notify a family. And the Department of Health doesn't really require that the hospitals properly notify families. So there's a problem. There's a form that each hospital could hand out when someone's admitted to the hospital, and that if a person filled that out in front of a nurse as a witness, it's good in New York State for that person to be called by the hospital and for the remains to be handled by that person. You don't need a will, you just need this form. But the city doesn't require, the Department of Health doesn't require that all hospitals hand it out. They can't require that people fill it out, but they can require that it's handed out. And if that happened, and email addresses and everything, the hospital was required to make those 3 phone calls, a lot of these people, and it was explained to the family that if you don't do this, it's going to be this mass burial on Hart Island. And you can also apply for burial assistance for $900, which would allow you to, most people prefer cremation, to get a free cremation. Everybody would do that, right, if they had that choice. Or if, it does require some organization that you kind of need to pay the funeral director up front, so you need that $1,000, from the city. But many of the funeral directors accept burial assistance as payment. And so there you go. The system there are many options that could prevent a burial on Hart Island. But on top of that, Hart Island doesn't need to be a shameful burial ground either. Right? It can be a beautiful. It's a lovely location, really. And now they're using GPS to mark the graves and whatnot, so it's going to be a relatively open landscape.
What if somebody doesn't have relatives in this country? Could friends take the position of relatives? Some place I read that on Hart Island, if friends find find out that a mutual friend is buried there, and they want to remove the body from Hart Island, that non-relatives cannot do that, is that true?
Well, you see, if they filled out that form, right? You can
Yeah,
assign
but
a
they
friend to handle your remains. But you have to sign,
In advance. But
And
once you're
I've
buried,
worked with relatives who have been overseas, who have been able to apply for burial assistance because the person being buried was a New York City resident. So I have worked with the Dutch consulate to do that,
yeah.
to get.
But if the relatives don't find out in time, and friends here
Because
would,
the Department of Health doesn't require the hospitals to include this form with the healthcare proxy and all that other paperwork that you get. And then they don't require the hospitals to make those 3 phone calls. If they did that, then
Right.
a lot more people
absolutely,
would, and the courts wouldn't challenge it. So it's really, you don't have a right to claim a friend if the friend didn't want to be claimed. And so that's the problem, right? Everybody should fill out this form and share it with one another, because it's not like a will. You don't need a lawyer, you just need a witness.
Yeah, just a further thought on that. Part of it might be you as the secretary of the estate. And so there might be a legal issue therein, which allows the executive of the estate to make those decisions.
yeah, but the executor may be a lawyer, for instance, who
Right.
doesn't know that you are dead because you are not daily in contact with
That's true.
him or her.
Well, there are cases where someone's executor and they allow for a burial on her, and then there really is nothing you can do.
Yeah, no,
So-
it's, in this case
So
it
then,
wouldn't.
choose your executor carefully, right, if you don't want to,
She has to know.
Rosalie.
In my experience, the social worker at the hospital just said, contact your funeral director. And we had no money, so I didn't contact no funeral director
The social
because I
worker
didn't have no
didn't
money
say-
for no
didn't
funeral
say,
director.
Oh, you can apply for burial assistance.
Yeah,
and-
nobody ever told me that far.
Right.
They got as far as call a funeral director, and that was not
Right.
something I could.
And the funeral directors, many of them are very nice, and they will tell you you can apply for burial assistance, but the ones that
Well,
don't
I'm
want to
glad.
accept burial assistance don't.
Otherwise, she wouldn't be in the traveling clock museum.
Yeah, well, she's not there yet, because we don't have 2014 in database yet, but she will be. Yes.
You started with a film, are you gonna show that film?
It's just a video intro. This video, this little bit. Oh, it keeps logging me out. Where's the Wi-Fi there? That's just film footage that I took when the city had a Veterans Memorial on Hart Island. And it was 10 days after Hurricane Sandy, so, and the docks were out, so they got help from the Coast Guard from Alaska, who was in the harbor, and they took us over, so they had this really fast, smooth, high boat. And so rather than schmoozing with all the politicians on the boat, I just got out my camera and I thought, whoa, this is the best footage I've ever got. So it's thanks to the US Coast Guard that we have this really good footage. Oh, and John is recommending if you go to the news and events, you can see you can get to all of these news items. So Rosalie's is here. You just go in and they're all hooked up. I've been pretty good. I haven't got the Bronx Times, or the story you just talked about.
No news from the Bronx Times, no,
Which one did you say was up today? I haven't added that yet. Here's the MSNBC one.
It tells where the community board has.
One was a
accepted it.
community board meeting,
Oh, yeah,
committee meeting.
I got one of those up.
Mhm.
Okay, let's see if we can get
And it
this.
tells the 2 bills.
Yeah, this is gonna be an ad to begin with, because it's network television, but they did a good job. Well, maybe not, where's the yours?
Yeah. I had my
guess it's just a bit of a slow connection here.
Became impossible.
After she's gone, we discovered that's something that has to be kind of planned out beforehand. We were unprepared.
So this is last summer, but it looks like it's pretty contemporary.
Just in time. My mother was karaoke Gladys. 2.5 years ago, she came on the
We'll come back.
train with what she could carry on the train. Didn't have any traditionally nice voice. She kind of made up her own notes as she went along.
Okay, we got good stills.
Yeah, if you pause it for a second.
Yeah, let it
We'll catch up.
Just like that, that's all I did.
Yeah, but then it's, okay, let's just say.
Had a great time, made tons of friends.
Carrie Gladys was the most incredible woman that I've ever met in my entire life.
There's something about
Oh, but it goes back to this. Okay.
her, like there's something about her that, an aura, where she walks in a room and you notice her.
She was like a grandmother that none of us ever expected to have.
She warmed everyone's hearts. She was a huge part of all of our lives here.
We had a good time, yeah, had a really good time.
If New York is a big mixed family, then Hart Island's the family too. Hart Island is the second largest cemetery in America, and it's the largest public cemetery. There are 1 million burials on Hart Island, and going back to the end of the Civil War, they're almost all mass burials. There are 1,000 infants per grave, or 150 adults. Inmates from Rikers Island are bused over to Hart Island, and they perform the burials and maintain the island. So these are some of the families that I've worked with to help find someone located in our database who is buried on Hart Island. This is a photograph of a South African man named Jean-Jacques Marais, and apparently he was an advertising executive who suffered from mental illness. And this is a photograph of Leonard Melfi, who was an important playwright in New York City, and he wrote one screenplay called Lady Liberty, and it stars Sophia Loren. So it's a photograph of him underneath the Brooklyn Bridge with his dad and Sophia Loren. And I would say at this point that I have over 500 families who have submitted stories or names. Each of these photographs is someone that someone went looking for, and so by definition they're not people that no one cared about. Now, basically anybody can go, but they can't go to any actual grave sites. They just go to this gazebo that's maybe not even 100 yards from the ferry. Many of these stories are tragic, and it's important for the family to feel that they can visit a grave site.
Nobody has told me that I had to call anywhere else first. What I was told was that I had to be here by 8:30 on the third Thursday of the month. These are for karaoke plans. Everybody loved her, but I usually very This is unnecessarily cruel. They're treating my mother like a prisoner.
She's from California.
If the city did transfer Hart Island to the Department of Parks, these people would be able to navigate there on their own and just do whatever they need to do, tell a story at the gravesite, gather their family, and remember that person. And I think mostly you're going to have a gathering on Gladys's first anniversary of her death in Manhattan. So I'll post that in the events when you give me the information.
So put on your calendar.
Treating childcare as a side issue.
36th Street with a nice view of the Empire State Building, and I'll feed everybody.
Okay, so do you want to talk about?
Oh, one more question, request, this is a request. Yeah, apartment style, not mass grave, but apartment style. People in New York can appreciate apartment style, it's a nicer word than mass grave.
Hey everybody, I know most of you, I think I emailed most of you to come here, so thank you for coming in short notice. My name's John Doyle, and beyond living, as a neighbor to most of you, I'm also on the Civic Association, and I recently, as of last week, joined the board of Hart Island, the Hart Island Project rather. And unfortunately, Rosalie, for what you experienced and what Elaine Joseph, who has come to many meetings, has experienced is all too common, and something that I think many of us feel is a human instinct and probably a moral instinct to change. So I just wanted to go through the legislation a little bit. That's really what I've been involved in, is trying to champion the legislation. Before I came on the board, I haven't done any lobbying since I've come on the board. So there are two bills, Intro 133 and Intro 134. Intro 134, I believe, is the one you all have. Intro 134 would transfer jurisdiction of the island over from the Corrections Department to the Parks Department, which we feel is more appropriate. Intro 133 would make it very clear in statute, in city statute, not some underhand, not some agreement that is, worked out between two people, but in local law, that in barge and the end of Fordham Street, when the ferry comes, the ferry's not operated by DOC, the ferry's operated by DOT, Department of Transportation. So they're not really a party to this in any way, but that ferry is open to the public, and that the times in which the ferry operates will be posted on a public website that anyone can see. So if something happens like what Rosalie experienced, there will be a website, they can go to the website, and it's clear and transparent and equal to everybody. So a few things that I just wanted to go through very quickly. And again, we're really here, we want to do this, I think, somewhat on a regular basis, is we want to hear from people in the community. Because there have been some people who have come out and in my opinion, are appealing to the worst instinct of human nature. And some of us have heard that, and I look around the room and I see many people who attend these civic meetings, and I'm thankful for that. And we want to reach the people who don't, that's why we're doing this on a Saturday afternoon, because we know people, aren't at work and maybe don't have the same child care commitments or the same commitments of personal time, so that they can come here and hear right from either one of us or Barbara Delenzik, who unfortunately couldn't make it today. It is her birthday, so she's allowed a little leeway on this. Her son was coming in. But to hear directly from us on why we're championing this, because I think for some people, even though this has been something we discussed at 7 meetings of the Civic Association last year, and it's in the Bronx Times thanks to the efforts of Pat Rocchio and Melinda's efforts with media and others on an almost weekly basis, people feel this is caught them by surprise, I guess, that something's changing after 40 years. So right now, this is with the Department of Corrections, and we didn't really get into
140 years.
Yeah, for quite a while. And it is with, and I don't think you really got into it earlier, but in Melinda's work, and I mean that website is really something else, Melinda, so credit to you and the web design team and all that you do. It's probably the most advanced website I think I've ever seen. In your research, you found that thousands of bodies have been displaced, right? That thousands of the infant burials are not accurate in terms of the
Well, they've lost the
Exactly.
location information, so the graves are gone.
Yes. So we have a situation where the entity that controls Hart Island is not doing the job it's intended to do, is why I bring it up. The buildings, and I look around the room, and was anyone else on our trip when we went out? I don't. Yes, Joe, I'm sorry, Joe. You were there, and Maria, you were there as well. Go ahead, ask that question.
You can see it in the video.
Yes, with the City Island Civic and the Chamber, we do try to work hand in hand whenever possible, because each community, the residential community, the business community, rely on one another. And we're fortunate in the regard that most of our businessmen and women, independent businessmen and women, do actually live in the community. They also operate out of it. We went there and we saw a scene that, I mean, if the Department of Corrections values that island, they're not showing it. I think, and please correct me, Joe or Maria, if I'm saying anything out of hand here, but the buildings were falling apart. I think we stepped too close to one and we were called back a little, because they haven't valued it in the years it's been under their possession, and that's really been a problem. As Melinda said earlier, the reason that the Traveling Clad Museum only goes back to the late 70s and the early 80s is because of an act of vandalism. And acts of vandalism are common. There's only people on the island now for 16 hours a day. So for the people who make
16 hours a week.
16 hours a week, my apologies. For the people who make it out to be as if this is Fort Knox right now, and we're seeking to change that, on what planet do they spend most of their time? I would ask them back. Again, we have relatives who come who are getting patted down, who are getting turned away, as Rosalie said. When we went, we were not allowed to bring our cell phones. I remember that, and we were, kind of kept from, and there's something undignified, I think, and I don't want to get to a preacher standpoint.
Contraband. Your cell phone is contraband.
Exactly. I don't want to get too preachy here. I think everyone goes to church on Sundays, but if we treat people who have suffered loss this way, that's pretty unconscionable. And then we have an agency in the Department of Corrections. We went to the community board to get their support, and they signed on en masse. But on the date we went there, 2 articles ran in the Daily News and in the New York Times detailing the latest scandal in which 70 people who worked there have criminal records that would
With
never have
gangs.
allowed them to actually work there.
With gang associations.
With gang associations, with prison records. And this is on top of the earlier scandal that broke earlier in the year, where there are hundreds of cases of brutality that are not properly documented. And we're not here to beat up on corrections. It's easy to kick a horse while it's lying down. But this is not an agency that can perform its most basic function. So why would we give them jurisdiction over Hart Island is a question unto itself. So why the Parks Department? I think as many people are asking, I've heard, we've been to meetings, and trust me, if you get 30 people in a room, you will get more than 30 different opinions as to what we should do here. One, it will be open. All Parks Department land is usually open to the people, and that's something I think
You
we
don't
should...
get arrested if you...
Yeah, I mean, yeah, thank God you haven't been for that.
I don't break the rules.
I would never
change
say to the otherwise. From a community perspective, and again, I live here with all of you, and I'm not going anywhere. This provides a fundamental protection for City Island that is also beneficial to the community. I would be for this even if it didn't. I have to be honest with you. You hear stories like Rosalie's, and you hear stories like Elaine Joseph's, and so many others that Melinda has brought to our attention. I would be for it anyway, but you look through the archives of the Island Current, and thankfully, being friends with Barbara, I have the opportunity to do that from time to time. Every 10 years, there is another bad idea for what we should do for Hart Island. In the 70s, they thought it should be an incinerator and a power plant, and people were not too thrilled with that idea. That is also when the landfill was operating out of Pelham Bay Park, and a lot of people unfortunately caught cancer, and it was shut down. It is actually zoned as an R6 site, which would allow development and large towers if someone would operate out of there. So that is something that would be kind of out of character with City Island in terms of land use. And again, as they wanted to build actually a larger scale in the 80s, a Department of Correction facility out there, and the Civic with other organizations. I wasn't involved at that time, I was still in diapers, but regardless, the Civic was very involved in having a lawsuit to stop that. They wanted to build a 400-person facility.
It was an overflow facility.
Exactly, and actually they wound up one day bringing out trailers in the Koch administration and just actually storing some of the people out there for low-level offenses. I mean, it wasn't,
Parking tickets.
Exactly. Some of us who are living on City Island probably have some of those problems. But, that was something I wanted to do, and we took them to court and we tried to stop that. And the reward for that was in the late 80s and early 90s where they wanted to put a homeless shelter out here. And as, so I see John's here and Annie and some of the others who are on the community board can attest there are problems with supportive housing coming into the neighborhood and not the proper regulations and questionable operators. So, this is a unique opportunity where, we could sit back and do nothing. And, for some people, listen, I mean, we all have better things to do with our time. I mean, everyone here probably had something better they wanted to do on a Saturday afternoon than hang out with me, I assure you. But this is an opportunity to do something proactive and to do something that I think is not only morally right, but something that we can all live with down the road. This is not going to be the next Six Flags Great Adventure, I assure you. This is going to be something that is dignified and something that, if you look at, as Melinda said earlier, you look at Washington Square Park, and you look at Madison Square Park, and you look at Ward's Island, Prospect Park, places that have these types of facilities, they're dignified. I mean, people go, but they're not, it's not rowdy. This isn't an extension of a beachhead or anything like that. So I think it makes sense for us. Once we get a transfer to Parks Department, it doesn't automatically become Parks land. I've had some discussions with people who know land use. We're probably still going to have to go through a ULURP process and everything else. But the benefits of having it eventually designated as parkland, which will be a process, is that when they want to alienate it, and that's what they call it parkland alienation, this was an act that passed in the 70s, is that they will not only have to go before the city council to pass that, they will have to go through the state legislature. And because that's such a cumbersome process, people do not want to go through the state legislature. So it provides an extra added level of protection for something that might come down the pike. So, I would just, and again, Melinda and I and Alan and so many others who are here, we just really want to hear from you. I mean, any concerns you have and any any questions really, or, you know, anything you guys really wanna share. I don't think it's, and I saw Kathy had her hand up first, and then Dee will go to you, yes.
Well, I wanted to address Ms. Hunt. First of all, thank you so much for your presentation.
Yeah, that was really great.
It's wonderful, and I think the premise of it is wonderful, and I think everyone should be buried with dignity and able to visit their family members. Not taking away from that, my concern more is the parkland. Some articles, one that I had seen on Ms. Hunt's website, and I put on my own social media page, and you put on our civic page, and it listed some of the parks. As a resident, member of the civic, member of the chamber, I live here, I own a business here, I don't really know if I would want to park. I want the people to be able to visit their families. That's an absolute, I totally agree with. For instance, in that article, Governor's Island, do we want, I mean, I know you had said it's not going to be a tourist destination when I brought that up with someone, but that article, summer getaway, do we really want that traffic on City Island? If it was maybe from Orchard Beach, a ferry, or,
Or it could be a ferry from Manhattan.
Sure,
That's
exactly.
where the original ferry was.
Yes.
And the private ferries are very interested in this. New York Waterways is, but they don't have access to a dock.
I understand,
Right,
so
so-
right now, the only dock is here up on Fordham Street.
Yeah.
And I think Candy wanted to say something, as her sister is,
Is the chief of operations with the Parks Department, she's
On Ellis
on
Island.
Ellis Island, and it does take a lot of money to restore. I've seen my sister pull her hair out, trying to raise money, having huge fundraisers.
To restore,
just to
the buildings
restore.
aren't gonna be restored.
Nothing will be
No,
restored.
the landmarks has turned them down already, and they're not gonna be restored.
And that's a
They're-
shame, because as of the
gorgeous.
70s, they were
They're
operating.
not,
which
yeah,
shows you
they're not worth saving.
leave something to
And
nature.
it's just not, we need the land for burial space.
what's your
So-
vision for, if it
That's
is,
my feeling, I mean,
Right.
I'm not the person in charge, right?
right?
But
But I
that's,
wanted a vision for the parkland later, to have administrative buildings, to have a type of museum, is any of that in the plan, or?
my feeling is that it should be more of a wilderness area that people go to, on, you know, a more restricted basis, so. Governor's Island is national parks, right?
Right, I know.
So it's not the same at all, right? So I don't think, I really think the city council has to determine that, and that this is going to, the people to direct your comments to
Okay,
are Elizabeth Crowley and Mark Levine, who, and, well, the two committees who are going to have a public hearing.
okay.
So we'll post when that is. They
Right.
never give you more than 2 weeks notice for those hearings. So it's your tax dollars, so you should weigh in on it. I don't live in New York City, so it's not my tax dollars.
With John, addressing what John said, I really don't believe a lot of the community, I'm not saying you didn't have meetings or things weren't posted. I think a lot of people were unaware.
Yeah,
Okay.
Until recently,
No, I understand.
the social media, on the civic page, and people became aware, and I put it on my page, and I know a lot of city islanders, I grew up here, they would not be fond of,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know, if it,
No, I understand.
not the way Melinda just designated how she would like to park, if it was any other way, and Parkland can also be alienated, and what do we open
Through a
ourselves?
very extensive process.
Right, and, right, the same process you have to go to make it a parkland also, but
Well,
without
if it goes to
alienation, they could build an ice skating rink, you can't have educational
That's not
facilities.
exactly accurate.
But I didn't say it's not, it's going to happen, but these are things as members of the community,
No, I understand.
they're
'cause
concerned about, and I think a
would
large
get
portion,
you- And I wrote down, I saw you with your
Right,
hand up.
a
and with
large
your hand up, just
portion
'cause we have
of
a lot
the
of questions
community
we wanna get to.
I will
was
say,
unaware.
I've
Melinda,
been
could I
here,
just-
I've been here 4 times in the last year.
No,
These have been open
absolutely.
meetings.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, not only has
I'm not
Melinda had
disagreeing.
meetings, this has come up in 7 meetings of the Civic Association.
I've been there.
This has been, for most of them, yes.
4 times.
And this is also, I mean, Pat Rocchio is profiling this in the Bronx Times, which is our weekly newspaper. On the scale of weekly, almost, every other week. News 12 has run numerous articles on this.
I'm not disagreeing,
No,
I'm
no, no,
just
but I'm
saying,
just saying,
people have said
at
they're
the
not
same
aware.
point, the community board is at hearings on this. I think the word is getting out there. There's gonna be there was an article in the Island Current in the past, which I how many people in here do read the, I mean, obviously people in here are somewhat connected, they're here. But we we do get the word out, I think in a very decent way. And Kathy, I know you're kind of, and I don't wanna put words in your mouth here, but to categorize what you're saying in the sense of that, kind of the worst case scenario, because we do need to prepare for the worst case scenario. What I would say is that no one in this room lives in a box or in a vacuum, and no one in this room is giving a blood oath or admiring this in stone.
Right.
In the sense of that this is a black and white law. If the law needs to be changed, and I speak as a member of the Civic, and I see Inga's here from our board and a few others, and I see the Chamber's board has representatives here as well. Rest assured, if there is a problem, we will consider that. That maybe in the end, listen, we have the dock there. There's other legislation to make the dock more public, because eventually we do want ferry service going to Manhattan. That's a long-term goal, which is not really connected to this. But at the same time, if it does become a traffic nightmare, which I do not believe would happen, we'll talk about moving into Orchard Beach. That's a change of one law. That's something we're here to do. But again, we can't allow the paralysis of fear to stop all sorts of action. And I think that if we sit around and we wait to do nothing, we're inviting the next disaster. I mean, listen, and I don't want to take the conversation horribly, of course, and I saw Dee, you had your hands up earlier, and John, and Rosalie over here, so I want to get to everyone else's questions to answer them. But at the same time, I remember people very upset about Dr. Mignone in the Italian American Nursing Center. And again, I stood beside many of you, and that I thought it was the most appropriate use of space, and I still feel that way. And now we have, the tow truck zooming on and off City Island, which really went in that space, and we're kind of dealing with that. So keep in mind, for every action, there's an equal but opposite reaction, and inaction is an action. It's in the word. So let's keep that in mind as well. Let's not, again, we can say, for each thing we do here, something might happen. But what we know right now is that people like Rosalie are being denied basic rights in some cases with their religion, but also a sense of common decency that I don't think any of us subscribe to. And we know that if we do nothing, that's an injustice in itself. So I choose to be, and I don't want to speak for anyone else in the room because I'm not empowered to, but I choose to be on the side of people who want to help those who are suffering.
Well, also the alternative is that a judge can order that Hart Island be open.
Yes.
Okay, and we've got litigation, so then you don't have any say.
And also, it's
Then
R6,
then it's
so
a
you
federal
might
judge
find some
saying,
apartment buildings out
open
there.
it tomorrow,
Right.
and that's it, then there's no
Dee,
plan.
you had your hand up.
So-
Totally in favor of the parks
Yes.
proposal. I was born on North Brother Island,
Oh.
and there's another
You were
amazing.
born there?
Yeah.
Wow.
If they find out you're not a clam digger, let me assure you they're
No,
coming
I'm
after you.
already,
so be
I'm
careful
punished
with that.
enough, I'm punished enough, but I know what happens when land is allowed.
It's like Obama and the birth
Fall.
movement, yes.
When an island is allowed to fall apart, so I'm totally in favor.
Wow,
Okay,
that's
all right,
amazing.
and then and then John had his hand up, so we'll go back all the way around here. Yes, Rose?
Judging by the time that I did go down there and try to take the ferry, I'd say that the ferry would bring a high class of tourists to the area. There was a couple who had just heard about it and were interested. They were from California, but they'd known enough to sign up with the list. There was a couple from Long Island whose baby had been born critically ill and helicoptered to New York City and never heard from again. And they were like 20 years before they even knew. And no, 20-something years had passed and these people still had tears running down their face. And there was a couple from Germany who had heard that there were German POWs buried at Hart Island and they just wanted to pay their respects. The kind of people who could populate bed and breakfasts and would love to come and have a nice meal after a traditional sort of visit with their ancestors, like any place else. You can go to a cemetery and afterward you can go and eat your dinner. And I would be just as disgusted if they put a Ferris wheel and touristy traps.
No, that's a good point. Just 1 second, John Morano had his hands up and we don't afford him the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, John. I just want, you should make it clear that, I mean, this is a great idea. I mean, I want this to happen, and Brendan's been working very hard with this project. But make it clear that this is the best option for for Hart Island to be transferred to parks, because it just makes it that much harder for someone private to build on the property. So
That's a very good
I don't think this is not gonna build, if we get this alienated to parks, all right, it just makes it that much harder for the city to put a homeless shelter or a medical facility or whatever
And the
it may
community
be
would
out
spend
there that are
forfeit
really,
to those,
right, so, I mean, that
That's fair.
is what we should make clear. And then all these other ideas down the line, the ferry, this, that,
Yeah.
that's a long way
Yeah,
in
it's
front of
gonna
us.
take time.
I mean, I think, so alienating the parkland and then,
Yeah, they could,
dealing with the issues that Brenda and the families have to make it a little bit easier for the families that wanna visit the deceased that are there, make it easier for them to do that. So I think one thing, I don't say it has nothing to do with the other, but there's two different
I agree.
ideas here, that will go hand in hand, but again, we have to have an open dialogue with corrections, and that's where the community board wants to continue,
good
and.
luck,
What?
good luck.
Well, I mean, you came to
Well,
us,
listen,
and that's what we
I
feel.
think at the end of the day, listen, I think we all share the same goal, and we voted on that, so let's, and Miss, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, where would the funds be coming from? Because I know.
For which part of it, Miss?
For the park,
That's a question
as the
for the
Parks
city
Department, how would the
Well,
Parks Department
again, it's
be
Parks
funded?
Department, and I encourage you, city limits has extensively documented this. All parks basically are a fiefdom of your local councilman. In the sense of that money goes where people spend time. That's why you see a lot of money spent on areas like Pelham Bay Park. You see a lot of money spent on Loretto Park and Morris Park. You don't see as much money spent in other areas, but there is a recourse for that, and that would be, I think, the end goal here is a conservancy. And conservancies outside of Manhattan have a mixed record of success, but we have a conservancy that's located right here within Pelham Bay Park that has been a tremendous success, and that's the Bartow Powell Mansion. That has been successful. People have taken that on. People have donated their time and donated their money.
Right.
And I think that's the end goal of, and I apologize, Melinda, if I'm speaking out of turn, or Alan, because they're both on the board, if I'm speaking out of turn here, I think that's eventually where we do want to go. Because we have a unique story to tell here in the sense of that this is the Potter's Field for the city of New York. So in a sense, it has a wider reach. Alan, yes.
And just building on that, John, Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, I've lived in Woodlawn for a long time. They've recently become a conservancy as well. And they've got lots of great events going on. They've got tours going on. Now, it's not the kind of tours that one would think of. It's a walking tour, maybe 10 people in a very large cemetery, okay? But it's beautiful because it really makes the history come alive in the cemetery. And it's also channeled funds to help restore a lot of the tombs and things like that have, we had some very bad hurricanes. And for many years, I called it my garden view. I mean, I lived in an apartment building on East 33rd Street that overlooked the cemetery. And after each hurricane, a major storm that we got, it really damaged a lot of stones. And frankly speaking, that's not the cemetery's responsibility to fix, right? They own the plots. And so it's created funds and opportunities to fix that. Now, on Hart Island, we're not talking about that scenario because there are no tombstones. But I think that it's a way of opening things up and really reconnecting us to the people who are buried there and it as a place. And I think that in this discussion and in other discussions, the concern about having a lot of traffic on City Island, is very legitimate. I think it's a real concern. And I don't think that the board insists on there being a ferry service from Staten Island in any sense.
City
I'm sorry, I'm thinking Staten
We
Island.
already have 100-person housing thing going right by the dock,
Yeah,
right past where I live.
No,
And
that's
they're
right.
gonna have to be part
And I
of
think
it too.
that's a discussion for you guys to have,
I don't think they really want that ugly dock.
But people are coming on the subways, right? When people come to Hart Island, they're not driving their cars, right? The people who are coming are tourists and whatnot, so they're taking car service or they're coming on, very few people actually are driving and parking on these Thursday tours. If you look, there aren't very many cars. That people are arriving by other means because it's too expensive to rent a car and park it in New York City. Most New Yorkers don't own cars. In Manhattan, nobody owns a car, right? Because it's too much trouble. So there, the transportation issues are, I think, a really, really small part. It's a big part of City Island. I realize when there's something going on at Orchard Beach that you have parking problems. But I think for Hart Island, the ferry that they currently have can take buses on the ferry. That's how the inmates get there, they don't get out and whatnot. So chartered buses could come from Manhattan, drive right onto the ferry and unload over there and not have anybody parking.
And just Melinda, I can say that it's a process. We're gonna, hopefully, God willing, and a knock on wood here, the council's gonna pass this. There was a meeting of the two chairs last week. We're gonna try it this way. If it doesn't work, and people start complaining who live on those blocks, and I have friends on those blocks, I'm sure you guys do too, you live here, we'll re-examine that. And Bob, you had your hand up, so let's...
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I feel like this is a very positive step forward, and I agree with the gentleman that spoke earlier in the back about, the funding, how it comes later on, and I think Rosalie, what she said, I think it would bring a lot of foot traffic to the island personally, like the same type of people that would go into like the little shops and antiques or whatever. And then my question is, you said, or Melinda said that it was still still active as far as burials and whatnot. I just see like this one obstacle being like security, I guess.
Yeah,
and you would have to, now like I would imagine security, I'm not saying it's like lacking, but they're not protecting civilians and stuff. But once you have more people going there, I would imagine that they're going to have to step up, how many guards there are and whatnot, because now you have normal people.
The fact is, when the parks have the public in them, they're all safer. It's parks that are abandoned that are dangerous.
Right.
And so right now, vandals are going over there and it's not secure because the DOC is only there 16 hours a week and they're not guarding it. So it's way better if you have people going there who will report and complain to the city and whatnot and get better service. Not just it's not just, Parks is gonna have jurisdiction, but there's still, the Department of Health is still on the code. Corrections is still on the code, plus the Department of Transport. So there's 4 city agencies that are gonna have to put money into this. It's not just one.
And Bob had a follow-up question, and then I
just I see these other hands up, let me go really quick. I think that how much traffic would be there is like pretty, I'm sure assuming it becomes open, whatever, I'm sure like at first there'd be like a heavy influx of people wanting to go visit their, they have that, I feel like everyone deserves that right to visit their loved ones or whatever. I think that though, after it
just like
kind of cools down, I really think that there really wouldn't be that much traffic, so I really don't think parking would be an issue, if at all.
No, I think actually the issue you raise is probably the more likely, in the sense of that in the long run, if you are going to have people on the island and you are going to have the inmates still conducting burial services, that does create it. That's a more, in my mind, realistic probability of what's actually going to happen.
Right.
And to address that, and Melinda, I apologize again if I'm speaking in a turn here, but the long run, I think, is that Department of Corrections, there's a documentary that aired on the Australian Dateline, and it's on the Hart Island website, and I encourage you to see it. You see them, and we're dealing with stillborn babies, and the inmates are kind of just tossing, underhanding it to another inmate to bury. And we're eventually going to need to, and again, as John said earlier, this is in a step of processes. We want to get it over to parks, then we want to get it to be parkland, then we want to get all these different things done. But I think, and we want to get a conservancy. In the end goal, maybe Department of Corrections is not the most appropriate site to be doing the burial.
Right.
I don't think that's the most dignified way, to be perfectly frank. And again,
And
we're now
not the
talking
cheapest
something
either.
15 maybe years out, but in the long run, maybe that's not the most dignified way to do that. Listen, the city does work with private contractors all the time. We have great morticians here in our general area. We have great morticians in the city as well. And the fact of the matter is, you could do this like a standard RFP and bring a far more dignified process to what's going on and probably do it for a lower cost. Again, it's not in the city's interest to bring these inmates out there if they're dealing with lawsuits. If we don't do it in a dignified fashion, and as Melinda has...
Or structured vaults and just let the Department of Health handle it. And so there's no transfer to the DOC of bodies at all. Because the medical examiner just puts them in a vault underground, we have a park on top, and it's their secure storage site. Just like you have I mean, this is a bad comparison, but everybody complained about putting a sewage treatment plant into Harlem, right? No one was gonna have a park on top of that. Who would go to that? It's a very successful park, right on top of a sewage treatment plant, doesn't bother
And
anybody.
we're gonna eventually have a passive park on top of the landfill of all things, believe it or not. I went on a tour of that a couple of years ago. But to build on what Melinda has also kind of, I guess, informed me when it comes to a lot of this, and that's that when it comes to DOC, is that in the end, the only requirement, I believe it's of the feds or of the state, is that the dead be dealt with in a uniform process. There in Los Angeles.
And that they remain buried.
Yes, and that they remain buried. That's we don't want. Yeah, this isn't The Walking Dead yet. But we don't want a scenario. For example, in Los Angeles, what they would do is they would cremate the remains, and then after 3 years, they have a standard burial where they bring in every denomination to do some level of prayer, and they do it that way. I'm not saying that's the solution. Yeah, I'm not saying that's the solution, even though it is public and everyone can access it. I'm not saying that's the solution, but eventually we are going to need to deal with what Bobby said, and we are going to need to deal with the fact that is inmate labor the most appropriate form here? And personally, I will say the answer is no. But I'm one person. Again, there are 30 in this room, and there's 4,500 beyond these walls, so it's not just our decision. So we will get to that. Did anyone else have a question? Yes?
Oh, I just wanted to make a comment about the transportation issue. The City Island Chamber of Commerce this year is going to launch a 18-passenger bus. It's going to be called the City Island Land Ferry, which is, the idea is to alleviate the car traffic coming on and off the island, and bringing small groups to tour and to do things like that, and to do a loop around Pelham Bay, Metro North, to, alleviate traffic issues, and to also bring more people onto the island to enjoy whatever it is.
That would work great.
That we have that everybody wants.
Boost to Main Street,
So that's happening in the spring, or by Memorial Day weekend, hopefully.
One last question.
One last question.
Now that you're on the board, what's your vision for the project?
Well, I think we've laid out most of that today. Is there a specific question you have in mind? I think
We don't have a mission for a conservancy at this point. If our organization were to become a conservancy, it would have to we'd have to change the mission with the IRS and the state and all of that. Our mission is to make Hart Island visible and accessible and to work with families, right? And so we have to be limited within mission, and legally we can't really lobby for any particular bill. No nonprofit can.
Let me know if you need any help. I'll get in touch with my sister.
We definitely
appreciate
need
that
help.
very much. Thank you.
Yeah, we need money and we need help.
And we're gonna, just on an extension of transparency and openness, we're gonna continue these meetings probably on a seasonal basis. So if you have friends and neighbors who have concerns, as they read about this, and the one-woman media firestorm over here known as Melinda Hunt, they can come to these meetings, they can learn from all of us as to why we want to do this. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
No, I'm actually, my brother Steve is my